Good morning. Welcome to episode 69 of the Driller Newscast, a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the drilling and groundwater industry. I'm your host, Brock Yordy, and this week, we're going to take it back to a local level. We're going to talk about townships and zoning. And this is why I want to go here. I know we've gone big. We've talked a global water crisis. We've talked PFAS throughout the country. We've talked a ton about the Western United States and our sovereign tribal nations' water requirements. In this big initiative that we have with the federal infrastructure law, it's about building roads, fixing our infrastructure. And there's lots of money out there. And this has driven a need for strategic deposits of sand and gravel and aggregate mining and quarries throughout the country. And with this need has come House bills throughout states to streamline the permitting process, because there's a lot that goes into gravel mining. And so today my guest is Mike Wilczynski of Pangea Environmental, a professional geologist in Michigan. And yeah, this is about a Michigan House bill and several townships that don't know what their rights are or how they should be educated to step in and discuss this type of aggregate mining, which we need. We're pro drilling, we're pro mining at the Driller, and it drives our industries. But we're also pro environmental stewards and doing the proper due diligence. So I want to welcome Mike and have a discussion on what our homeowners and residents should have for education, what a township should understand, and how this works, because there's two ways this could go. There are House bills that are streamlining it to remove it from local zoning ordinances in townships so that it's at a state level. And then there's others to make a collaboration and how we can do it best. No different than when we drill water wells from a residential home to a municipality. We go through the permitting process and the due diligence, and we have regulators, and we work at this. That's all that needs to be done, is the right, proper assessment to the risk and the reward. So let's welcome Mike. We're going to talk a little safety in the middle of this with air quality. And there's a lot of information here because drillers, it's only 23 million American homes, about 15% of our population that is on private water wells. And aggregate mining done improperly that digs within 1 foot of the water table has opened up all of those wonderful filtering layers that Mother Nature had given us to protect our groundwater to right at it. And we see this with PFAS and Gen X chemicals and phosphates and nitrates and everything that seems to be finding its way into our groundwater faster. We need to be smart in educating our people, because when the groundwater is contaminated, here comes the pipelines. Sometimes that's right, sometimes that's wrong. But we have a federal infrastructure law in place right now requiring concrete and aggregate and gravel, because we have a failing infrastructure, including our water and wastewater facilities and our roads and our bridges. This is something we need. We just need to do it right. So I welcome Mike. Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little overview of how you got here into this industry.
I'm Mike Wilczynski with Pangea Environmental LLC. I'm a certified professional geologist. I've got a bachelor's and master's in geology, and I took hydrogeology as a PhD student before I decided to become a dad, and that was more important. Work industry, about 45 years experience. I started working in the mining industry in 1979 in Wyoming, and pretty much worked around the country, Western Canada, South America, and environmental projects related to oil and gas and mining. And worked for the DEQ, taught for a while at a community college, and I retired, and I was running nature hikes at Island Lake Rec area near my house. and someone asked me about an aggregate mine that was giving them a problem. And that was 4.5 years ago. And that kind of got me into this, and this pretty much became a full-time, I guess, advocation, because I'm not charging anyone. I volunteer my services to communities to help them become educated, and the planning commissioners or anyone will listen.
So what should residents know when this comes up, that there's a possible aggregate mining coming into their area?
It all depends on the state. You know, I can speak from Michigan. You know, the aggregate mines are regulated at the local level by townships. And so you have to be aware of the township ordinance on mineral extraction. And many of these are out of date. In fact, just about all of them are. They're not compliant with the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, which is what they should be following. And that leads to problems because of conflicts between what the communities want and what the townships can do. And it ends up in a legal mess. But anyway, I would say make sure your ordinance is updated and compliant with the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. That is probably not if you're in Michigan. So you need to be proactive. And if one mine is coming in, if you know one is coming in, hopefully you've already read the township ordinance. You need to read any state law that regulates zoning. In Michigan, you only can deny an aggregate mine for specific reasons. You know, you just can't zone them out. And those are called very serious consequences. And so under the Zoning Enabling Act, the process is showing need and value, and then balancing the need and value against the potential very serious consequences that may occur. And I'll just read them right from the Zoning Enabling Act. It's the relationship of existing and associated activities with existing land uses, impact on existing land uses in the vicinity of the property, impact on the property values in the vicinity of the property and along the proposed hauling route serving the property based on credible evidence, the impact on pedestrian and traffic safety in the vicinity of the property and along proposed hauling routes serving the property, impact on other identifiable health, safety, and welfare interests in the local unit of government, and the overall public interest in the extraction of the specific natural resource on the property. So those what you have to evaluate. And you know, as a geologist, sand and gravel occurs in the same locations where you have wetlands. You know, in glacial geology, you get it in these outwash areas, and it's permeable, and so it forms our lakes, our aquifers, and our wetlands. But it's also a mineable resource, and so there's sometimes conflicts between protection of surface water and wetlands with the extraction of the natural resource. It's important to become to get your community organized. You need to have a united voice and have meetings and educate, because the planning commissions, they don't understand mining. They don't understand the Zoning Enabling Act because they're used to approving garages, setbacks, things like that. Something like this is out of the ordinary to them. And it's rare to find a planning commission who has anyone on there who has any experience with mining or understanding of geology or environmental science. And so it's an educational process. And we're doing that in several townships now where we're meeting, we're doing community education. We've given a couple short presentations to the township and been sending them information so that they understand the impacts of a mine on a community.
It's important that we have good quality gravel and silica for everything we're doing for the federal infrastructure law right now and the Inflation Reduction Act. We're building roads. Governor Whitmer, you know, said let's build these roads. I think there was a explicitive in her exact comment. So it's a balance here, you know, and it's rural communities, because obviously you can't mine gravel in the middle of an urban area, and we end up with township boards that 5 people meet, and you know, one person that's upset about a fence on somebody else's property maybe shows up. But you know, these are not things that we attend well or even have any idea of what's going on before it's it's here. Or you start seeing stakes in the middle of a field and you go, what's going on?
Yes, they only have to notify landowners within 300 feet in Michigan with a proposal, special use permit. So a lot of times, this is one person, two people, but they talk, and so you have to watch the township minutes, the meetings, and what's going on. You have to be involved. And a lot of times, these sneak up on people. They really do. It's like all of a sudden they find out, oh my God, there's a mine going in, and they've already had a meeting, a planning commission meeting. And so you have to watch what's going on in your community. And yes, we do need sand and gravel. I worked in the mining industry. I am a pro mining person overall. I'm pro oil, and there are things we need, but we need to do it right. I've worked in mining and I've permitted mines. I've explored for mines and I ran them. And there are ways that do things right and minimize the impacts and work with the community rather than fighting them and coming in as a bully and threatening a lawsuit if you don't approve our mine, and as what many times they do.
So what due diligence should a township look into getting involved? You said you do advocating for this and you're doing educating, but it sounds like at some point we got to open our checkbook and bring in some folks that are advocating for us, not just engineering the outline to a mining project, right?
Right. It's important for townships to realize they can hire experts and bill it to the applicant. And that's typically what is done. The applicant should put up an escrow account so that the township can hire the third parties, the experts, to review an application. And that would include, a geologist, a hydrogeologist, environmental scientist, a land planner. It would depend on the situation. And that's typically what I'm seeing townships starting to do. Originally, they were trying to do it all on their own and places where I was going, but now they're starting to hire experts and bring people in, and that's really helping a lot to get a more fair review.
And they can charge that back to the applicant.
Yep, that's what they're doing. Yeah. So, it's you can get the help, and that's what townships need to know. That if you want to apply, you have to make sure your ordinance allows for the charging back, to the applicant. I'm pretty sure most of them do. The ones I've seen have.
So we get these experts, and we figure out if it can work, if rural homes in this project can coexist. What about the life cycle of this project from day one to the end? What are requirements for restoration or reclamation or that type of thing?
Yeah, that's a real issue. These mines go on for decades. There's mines around Brighton where I live that probably were started about the time I was born, and they're still mining. Reclamation is a real issue. It's very difficult to get things to grow on sand. It's difficult to strip the topsoil and not mix it in with the subsoil. Many times the topsoil, if they store it, it's not managed properly. Topsoil is a living thing. You can't just let it sit there. You've got to keep managing it properly. And reclamation is a real problem. A lot of times they'll say they're going to put in a lake and put in homes. And I haven't seen that really happen that much in my limited experience in Michigan and getting along that far in a project. But I can say I proposed this in 1989 or 1990 in New Jersey, that when we were done mining, we were going to have a residential community around a lake. Nothing happened. That was 30 some years ago. And so it's kind of hard to hold somebody to the reclamation plan when they're decades out. Well,
and you can change entities, and
yes,
there's lots of things, and we see mining that's happened in the Upper Peninsula that has tailings ponds that sit up gradient of our Great Lakes that we still don't know who to ask to clean up or how we're going to apply that. We just mitigate,
Yeah, we've got the stamp sands and all of that along near Gay, Michigan, and all of that. Yeah, along the Keweenaw. Fortunately, sand and gravel mining, the material's rather inert that's being mined as far as the water goes. The problem is the dust. Silica dust is a hazard. Any particulates that are very, very fine in the 2.5 micrometer, I believe it is, that can get deep in your lungs is not good for you. And these mines generate a lot of dust. They're open areas. You have hundreds of acres open sometimes that are large source of dust. It's like this, like a desert. The wind comes and it blows dust and clouds into people's homes. And in Michigan, silica is not regulated around any kind of aggregate mine. They're exempt. OSHA and my OSHA regulate, MSHA regulates it at the mine site. But as soon as you cross the road, there's nothing. There's no protection for the residents. There's an opacity standard the state has, the miner has to make, but that's about it. And then when you try to file a complaint, by the time Eagle comes out, the wind has changed and there's no dust. And that's one of the problems.
So from an air quality monitoring, it's all on site. It doesn't, once it blows across the street into a horse pasture or onto that farmhouse, it's not regulated.
No. In fact, there's no, I don't think they monitor even around the perimeter for anything. I think they wear personal scanners or monitors periodically for testing, but no one's really looking at the air quality leaving a mine site that I know of.
Doesn't that come back to very serious consequences, or being a hospitable neighbor to
exactly? Yeah, we'd like to see some kind of changes to the general permit that the state grants for aggregate mining to require some monitoring for silica, or at least some studies to show that it's not an issue. Right now, we don't know. It's an unknown. No one's really studied the non-occupational exposure of silica dust. It's been studied a lot at the workplace, but non-occupational exposure it's hard to find anything that's credible. A few articles that appear in like trade journals that aren't peer reviewed. And so that's what we need. We need a scientific study that's peer reviewed.
Which is wild, because the silica standard for 1926 construction OSHA is very strong, the same as the general industry silica standard for employees and employers. And now we're saying it's the same community, it's the same air we breathe. That's a tough one to swallow, right? I guess.
And I'm not an air quality expert, but I've talked to people who work in that area, and it says fine material that can travel for miles and stay suspended almost indefinitely. It's like 1/100th the diameter of the thickness of your hair. And that's the stuff that's really nasty. And it's the fresh fractured rock that really produces a lot of that. One thing I wanted to mention, you were talking about rural. Not all these mines are in rural areas. Some of them are being proposed in what I would consider urban. The state themselves, the DNR, was trying to lease 120 acres in the middle of Genoa Township, surrounded by, I think, 4,000 homes within a mile or something like that, and that got pulled. But even in the Irish Hills right now, they're proposing a 300-acre mine among a resort community, a lakefront community. So some of these are being proposed close to population centers. So just because it's rural doesn't, that's just not the case. They can happen everywhere.
So advice for residents, obviously due diligence has to be done. This becomes very emotional when you think of our pristine farmland, our wetlands, our water, what we consider the country, the rural areas where people are horseback riding. It's tough. We watched the television series Yellowstone, and Dutton, Kevin Costner's character, is always fighting some sort of mine. Yeah,
and it's and the thing is, each one of these applications can take a couple of years to review, and so it's a lot of stress on these people that's long term. One of the industry always says this, or sometimes tries to put the blame on the communities dragging their feet in the review. But the problem is the applications that I've seen are pretty bad. If I would have submitted to that, I would have been fired. I mean, it's lacking information. Some of them are more editorial. One was 3 pages long, their whole environmental study. I actually had one guy in northern Michigan who thought saying there is no adverse environmental impact was an environmental impact statement. Really, that's what he thought it was. And so that's kind of the world you're working in. So you kind of see how much education you have to do sometimes and how much resistance you get from people who don't want to listen, because this is how we always did it. You know, we're finally going after the aggregate industry is finally facing people who understand the law and are using it. And that's why they're trying to take away local control. Like I said, I haven't seen townships dragging their feet. I've seen it mainly being the problem of the mine applicant not submitting information, dragging it, disappearing, not coming back for a few months, not telling what's going on, and then turning in something that's inadequate.
So that's pretty much the last piece here. We're seeing where in the state of Michigan, we have a House bill that's trying to expedite, aggregate mining because of all the roads and all the building we need to do. We've seen Sackett versus the EPA, which on this newscast we've talked about a lot. The waters of the United States. Right now the most latest federal budget proposal has decreased the EPA's funding, for the next budget. We have regulatory agencies, we have due diligence to do, and then we have this. How do we speed right through, because we need to be able to do 80 miles an hour on the highway?
Well, there's not a real study done that's credible that shows how much we really need. There was a study that MDOT put out in 2016 that showed where aggregate shortages were around the state and where we needed it. It showed there was actually surpluses in Northwest Michigan. However, I believe it was the Auditor General or Inspector General said that report was unduly influenced by the aggregate industry and has since been discredited. And there's red marks on every page, if you can find one online, that state that. So we really don't know what's needed. And sometimes it's not sand and gravel. Sometimes it's crushed stone. That's a totally different animal. That's bedrock material. And a lot of that comes in from Canada on barges and from northern Michigan. And for some applications, that's what they want rather than the gravel or the sand. And so we really do need to find out what we need, where we need it, and where it is. Michigan probably has more aggregate, sand and gravel than any other state I can think of. It's just about everywhere. It's not gold. We don't need to destroy the environment to mine it because it's not that rare. And we need to put more effort. The State Geological Survey needs to be supported to do more mapping. John Yelich has been trying to do an excellent job with hardly anything, and he needs support to get more people on this, to map these resources so that we use them before we mine them. Dr. Mazzola, who was one of my thesis advisors in the 70s, was pushing this. He said, we're mining aggregate, or we're building subdivisions before we mine the aggregate, and we're covering up some of the best resources we have. That was 50 some years ago. It's about time someone listens and does something like that and does it seriously.
Yeah. And, we do have, because of the giant chunks of ice that came through here and made some great, wonderful lakes for us. And, all of our glacial, deposits, that is some of the best drinking water. And now, you have this other side of it, and that's, for a lot of the listeners to the newscast, they're water well drillers, and they're thinking about, how can this impact our groundwater? How can I keep my livelihood? Because these rural communities, there's only about 26 million American homes that have private water wells in the United States right now. And Michigan's one of the top states in the country for private water wells. So it's, again.
Yeah, because we have shallow groundwater. I can go in my son's yard and go down 1.5 feet and I'm in groundwater. Yeah. So I told him we don't need a well. Just your garden will irrigate itself with a capillary fringe.
Yeah. So we just need to advocate and educate with our residents and our contractors. And
I'd like to see legislators talk to residents. All of this legislation is being proposed by the industry with some involvement, maybe from a legislator sponsoring it. But I don't see them coming out and going to mines and talking to people who live next to them and experience what they have to go through every day. I know people in Jackson County who cannot sell their homes because it's next to a mine. And the industry is touting that there's no property devaluation when a mine goes in. That just, to me, defies common sense. I'm not going to pay the same for property that has a mine next to it as one that doesn't. And to say that it's not going to impact value and that's one of the very serious consequences, that's misleading. And sometimes the haul routes are even worse than the mine site itself because the houses are closer to the road. We're looking at 200 trucks a day at some of these mines. That's what, 8 an hour coming by your house. And these are, and there's a lot of vibration, there's noise, they're bringing dust. And so it's not just the mine. Sometimes it's the haul routes that are actually suffer more damage. I know in one town, there's an old historic building that's suffering foundation damage from the vibration of old trucks.
That's unbelievable. So let's say for the state of Michigan, the House bill passes and they're able to expedite. What are the options, or what would you see as a better solution than taking control completely away from the townships?
I'd like to see a hybrid system, and I think one is being worked on right now in the legislature. I'd like to see some minimum state guidelines that townships have to adhere to, and put that in REPA, the Natural Resource and Environmental Protection Act, our state law. But still leave the approval process to the townships where they can hire the experts. And if there's a problem, you go to Eagle instead of going to court right away. I think it'd be a much simpler process. As far as having permitting under Eagle being faster, I'm not sure if that's really true or not. If you contest an Eagle permit, you go into an administrative law hearing, which is pretty similar to circuit court. And that can go a long ways, a long time. I testified at one last year, and I think they're still debating what to do. So the state, going to the state does not necessarily streamline everything. And I think the current House bill is not very popular. It was stalled in committee. It was supposed to come out on a Tuesday, and that Tuesday morning it was pulled because of all the petitions that they received from people around the state who did not like it. So people are speaking up and the word is getting out.
And that's the tough part. We see this with groundwater legislation a lot right now, where you have big groups advocating at a state or federal level with their lobbyists, and we're losing the voice. The National Groundwater Association, we go once a year to DC to, advocate for clean water and, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, what they're doing with rural wells. And, there's all these pieces we have going. And the same week we were there was the week that the House decided to quiz the guy that owns TikTok. And, we were just overshadowed for the most part. We had some good, senators meet up with us, but many of our Congress people, they were in there asking questions about TikTok and not about our environment.
That's sad. Yeah, it seems like lately, there's been a decline in interest in the environment. We're not seeing the Cuyahoga River catching on fire anymore, or we're not finding a Love Canal, but we're finding things that we don't see that are maybe just as bad as like PFAS, where it's dangerous in a part per trillion range. So out of sight does not mean it's still safe.
We talk a lot about PFAS and the fact that 3M settled for $10 billion on this first round, and we saw DuPont and Chemours do 1.8 billion last month, going into this. And our American Waterworks Association, AWWA, has said, from a municipality standpoint, there's about $3 billion a year spent on just point of entry treatment of PFAS. PFAS is a very scary thing. And opening holes in the ground and removing some confining zones opens us right up to, our groundwater being much more susceptible.
Yes, exactly. When you remove a protective clay layer, or when you mine within a foot of the water tables, I'm seeing in some places the townships are allowing, simply because that way they don't have to get a Part 301, 303 permit from the state if they don't create a lake 5 acres or larger. So they're allowed to mine within a foot of the water table. Yet the elevation of the water table is not established. and there's no markers. So, it's just kind of like, oh, well, we're just going to go ahead and see how close we can get. And I have some aerial photographs showing where they're actually mining in the capillary fringe right now, but they don't need a permit. And it's 20 acres. And if they don't get their permit, we're going to have 20 acres of farmland that has been wasted. And 20 acres of sand is going to contribute to the dust in the area.
It's frustrating is what it is, we do have a lot of great water in our state here in Michigan. And then you look at the Western United States and how it's coming and going, and this is the resource we 100% should be protecting, is our farmland and our groundwater.
Yes, we have such a large percentage of the world's water. We need to take care of it and not let the Great Lakes be the sewer. I lived in Western South Dakota. I know how hard it is to get water. And back in 1989, our water bill was $140 a month. It's expensive. We're blessed here in Michigan. If you don't want to pay for the water, you can put a well in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So any last advice for the drilling industry or homeowners that may watch this?
Be vigilant, watch what's going on, and educate your planning commission ahead of time. Look at a state map that shows where sand and gravel deposits generally are. There is a map came out in 1982 for Michigan. It's fairly accurate. I've been using it most of my career in Michigan for 30 some years and found it to be very useful. See if you have sand and gravel in your area. And if you do, see how it's zoned and how it's managed. And talk to your zoning administrator and your zoning commission and your planning commission and educate them on sand and gravel and the Zoning Enabling Act ahead of time. So it's not a rush and a crush project all at once.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Well, you're welcome. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks. It was a lot of great information by Mike as he advocates and educates folks throughout Michigan. And as groundwater professionals and drilling professionals, we need to be advocating in any state that we're in as we see these fast track bills come through with less collaboration on what the impacts are going to be. And it all comes down to this. In the past 6 years, we've seen a lot of deregulation and defunding of environmental oversight and protection. Mother Nature and homeowners need to be protected appropriately. The federal infrastructure law has been something that's been in the works for more than a decade. Why? Because our infrastructure is failing, especially in these smaller rural American towns and villages where we just haven't had the right budgeting or the right fundings. So roads and bridges and water piping infrastructure and water facilities and wastewater facilities are beyond their life cycle. So we have this great infrastructure law that's come into place along with the Inflation Reduction Act. And what does that require? It requires more aggregate, gravel, sand, concrete that is strategically located and of high quality grade. The problem is trying to fast track state bills that eliminate environment safeguards and remove public input is not the way we should be operating. Mother Nature requires proper due diligence by scientists, engineers, and experts in all aspects, from impact of the community to impact of water quality, air quality, quality of life for all living species. I loved it when my governor, Gretchen Whitmer, state of Michigan, said, "Let's fix the damn roads." I cheered. We live in a great state. Agriculture is a big piece of our state. Roads are a big piece of our state. Motor City. However, at what cost do we do that at? So in 10, 20, 30 years from now, when that administration is gone and we're into a new generation, who's going to fix our damn environment? That's what we need to think about as drilling professionals, construction professionals, groundwater professionals. We work in collaboration with engineers and scientists and regulators on a daily basis for water wells, for septics, for municipalities to protect the public and everybody's interest. We need to figure out how to coexist on these mines. And if you don't think that this is a problem, why is there almost $20 billion in the federal infrastructure law for mining reclamation and orphan wells and environmental cleanup of when the resources are gone, the funding's also gone to do the due diligence to return that land into something that's back to being usable. And that's what this is about. It's not about zoning. It's not about being in your neighbor's backyard or your backyard, even though that's very heartfelt and hard to be part of with everything else that's deregulated on this. It comes back to being good environmental stewards and neighbors. So thank you for joining episode 69 of the Driller Newscast. Next week, we will be doing a special Jubilee edition with some interviews, and we have special guest Jason House, El Presidente of the NGWA. He is going to talk about what he's done in his first 8 months and what's going to happen in Vegas. I hope you have a safe and productive week.